And welcome. Again, as Anna said, my name is Jason Meyer, and I have the pleasure of serving you as the Director of Student Engagement Leadership here at Emerson College. Tonight, we're honored to bring to you an incredible discussion and talk back about the Netflix documentary Disclosure. And I wanted to take a minute to acknowledge and thank someone who has been working tirelessly on this program, who would never say how much they've done to make this happen. So that is Anna Fetter, our Director of Programming for the Bright Lights film series here at Emerson College. Anna works tirelessly to ensure that she brings the most thoughtful, intersectional programs to campus and creates these amazing learning opportunities. And we would not be here with Jen and Sam today if it wasn't for Anna and all of her work. So please, 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 give your thanks to Anna for everything that she does for our campus. And if you have not checked out the Bright Lights film series, there has been an amazing, amazing season of really thoughtful shows that Anna has put together. So please check it out. That said, I'm going to be quiet and turn things over to Anna, who's going to introduce our panelists and kick things off.
Thank you, Jason. I was not expecting that. Welcome everyone to our discussion on disclosure. My name is Anna Fetter. I'm the Director of Programming in the Visual Media Arts Department here at Emerson College. The Boston campus resides on the ancestral and unceded lands of the Massachusetts people, whose name was appropriated by the Commonwealth. And I'm currently in Providence, Rhode Island, the occupied land of the Narragansett and Wampanoag people. So I'm here to tell you a bit about about how the program will flow and introduce our speakers. So there'll be some questions from our moderator and a discussion with panelists. And then after about a half hour or so, we'll open up the conversation for you all to join in. So feel free to submit questions at any time via the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. When we're ready for your questions, I will call on folks. If you'd like to ask your question with video and audio enabled, just raise your hand digitally. You do that under participants. And then I'll enable your video and audio so that you can interact with the panel. Otherwise, I'll read your questions or Carl will read your questions and then the panel will respond. So first, we have the Director of Disclosure, Sam Feder. Sam Feder has created several award-winning documentaries that center the intersections of race, class, sexuality, and conflict within the queer and trans community. Sam seeks to connect transgender struggles and liberation to the context of the present and legacy of the past by showing that our communal history makes our present lives possible. Sam's second feature, Kate Bornstein is a Queer and Pleasant Danger, was named one of the best LGBT documentaries of 2014 by The Advocate and cited by IndieWire as one of the must-see films of 2014. We're also joined by Jen Richards. Jen Richards is a writer and actress as well as consultant and advocate. She's the co-writer, star, producer of the series Her Story, which was nominated for an Emmy and won Gotham and Peabody Awards, co-producer of the documentary More Than Tea for Showtime, and writer of its accompanying Trans 102 series, Refinery 29, a 2016 Outfest screenwriting fellow, and her feature script Any Given Week, for her feature script Any Given Week, and writer and star of the short There You Are. She can also be seen in HBO's Mrs. Fletcher, Netflix's Tales of the City, NBC's Blind Spot, FX's Better Things, CBS's Doubt, CMT's Nashville, CISO's Take My Wife, the film Easy Living, and Two Sentence Horror Stories from Stage 13. Jen was a regular on E's I Am Kate, featuring in Logo's Beautiful as I Want to Be and AOL's True Trans with Laura Jane Grace, covered live events for Logo, has appeared in several videos for BuzzFeed, OWN, and After Ellen, and countless podcasts and YouTube shows. And then to moderate the conversation, we have P. Carl. P. Carl is a senior distinguished artist in residence of the Department of Performing Arts at Emerson College in Boston, and the author of the memoir Becoming a Man, The Story of a Transition from Simon & Schuster this year, 2020. He was the spring 2020 Anschutz Fellow at Princeton University, awarded a 2017 Art Change Fellowship from the Ford Foundation, the Berlin Prize Fellowship from the American Academy for the fall of 2018, and the Andrew W. Mellon Creative Research Residency at the University of Washington. His work has been published in the New York Times Magazine, the Boston Globe Magazine, and LitHub. He's currently working on the stage adaptation of Becoming a Man, commissioned by the American Repertory Theater, or the ART, Diane Paulus directing. So welcome to everyone, and I will hand the conversation over to you all.
Great. Nice to meet you, Jen and Sam. Really good to be here with you. Thank you for taking the time. I thought maybe we'd just start. The beauty of teaching at Emerson College is that the students here are wildly creative, and many of them are studying to be directors and performers. So I thought just maybe briefly, if Jen and Sam, you just a little like how you got to where you are right now, because I know they'll be interested in that. So,
you want to start, Jen? No. How I got to where I am. Well, I started making films. Oof. Okay. Where should I start? I mean, like, where I was born. Like, how far back do we want to go?
You know, that kind of like, how you got into film, and maybe your first way in that.
I mean, honestly, storytelling and activism were always hand in hand. So when I was 15, I started telling photo essays, and at that time, I became politicized around HIV, and because this was in the late 80s, early 90s in New York City, and so I was doing photo essays about children who were born to parents who were HIV positive and then were put into adoption, and those families. So very early on, my storytelling was enmeshed in my political work. And then when I was close to 20, I think I started getting interested in filmmaking and in documentary filmmaking. And I'm just kind of going through my brain of like how many details to go into. But basically, I tried working for other people for a while. It just doesn't really fit my temperament. So very quickly, I just kind of went on my own and started making my own work. And the first film I made, I was in grad school, and being in school did help me with deadlines. Basically, that's it. Like I didn't, you don't learn that much in school. You really just learn like what you're, oh wait, I'm talking to students. You learn so much in school, and deadlines are great. And you learn your practice. You learn how to be a practitioner, right? Anyway, let's just pretend I didn't say that. So in grad school, I made my first documentary, and I started that in 2003. And then just went from there and, built my community of makers. And when I was making my second film, when I finished my second film, that was when I first met Jen. And that was in 2003 2014. And that was interviewing her for a project that actually never got finished, but it just, then we stayed friends over the years. And then she came on Disclosure very early on doing research, and the rest is history.
That's great. Thank you. And, we'll get into more details, I'm sure, about as you made your way to Disclosure. Jen, you have a couple of some thoughts on your path?
Yeah, Sam, I didn't know about the HIV photo project. Somehow that's never come up. I'm really intrigued by that. Yeah, I've been acting and writing for as far as I can remember. My parents did community theater in Mississippi, and so I was first on stage at 6 months old as the baby on stage, and have been writing as far as I can remember. All the women in my big Southern family are just great storytellers, and it was always a kind of natural extension of gathering on the porch over tea and telling tales. And I always just did it for fun. I just acted and wrote for fun. I never had any professional aspirations until after transition, which is when I really got politicized and saw in my community how many stories needed to be told, and how the kind of residual privileges I had as, being a middle-class white person, that I felt like I had a kind of moral imperative to use some of those privileges to help tell those stories, and just kind of got fired up and wrote this little web series and starred in it, and then it took off, and one thing led to another, and here I am.
That's great. And just congratulations to you both. It's such a great Disclosure has just gotten so much great attention, deservedly so. And it's been really amazing to see something take, just sort of take off in the world of trans representation, because that is not an easy feat, let's just say. And so I wondered maybe, Sam, one of the things as I listened to you give a keynote not too long ago, you talked a lot about process and product, and how they are not so distinguishable to you, that one is as important as the other. And I thought the process you described making disclosure was really fantastic, and I wondered if maybe you might share that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, as soon as I kind of committed to making this project, I knew I couldn't do it. I couldn't create the history by myself. Like, creating history is so ethically precarious, no matter who's doing it. So from the get-go, I knew this had to be as many voices as possible, and it had to be all trans voices, right? This history had to come from the perspectives and the memories and the experiences of trans people. So the first thing I did was make a list of every trans person I knew who worked on one side of the camera or the other. And I spent about 8 months traveling around the country doing research interviews with people. And often it was just me, with my, backpack of, traveling lights and mics and cameras and doing the interview, and, have things rigged up all the way to the ceiling. And, but that's where the film started. And then the nexus, the heart of the film, is many, many, many trans voices. Built that database. And then we, on set, we prioritized hiring trans people. Now, also, everyone in the film, everyone you see is trans, right? That goes without saying. But not everyone understands that behind camera, we prioritize hiring trans people. And that's just as important, because just everything of how you're framing and how you're talking to people, and just the feeling on the set influences what's going to happen in the conversation. And so, again, that was a no-brainer. Like, we had to have as many trans people on set in decision-making roles as possible. And when we couldn't hire a trans person for a key role on set, we mentored a trans person. So every non-trans person we hired, had to be really excited and committed to mentoring a trans person. And the domino effects of that decision, started day one. After our first shoot in January 2018, our gaffer who's the general lighting technician, she went back to her union and instituted the first trans sensitivity training because of her experience on our set, right? She was so moved by the relationship she had established and the history she was learning, that it occurred to her that, a union might not be the most welcoming place for a trans person, for a new member. And so she took it upon herself, and within like a month, 50,000 people were trained on, how to streamline being a union for a new trans person, a new trans member. And then, so many of our mentors are like now working in the field. Mentees, are working in the field. I mean, this is a model that the whole industry should be taking on. There's so much talk about diversifying stories and being more inclusive. And if you're not looking at behind the scenes, how these stories get told from the beginning, and when we're talking about, in disclosure, there's a whole part about casting, which Jen talks about really beautifully, and I think makes the most compelling argument that we've ever heard. And particularly, it really resonates with me because it really connects to the real life violence that a lot of trans people face when you cast a non-trans person. But I always have to have, when we're having those conversations about casting, like, it doesn't, at the end of the day, if it's a bad movie, it doesn't matter who you're casting, right? So at the beginning, who's writing that movie, right? Who's producing that movie? Like that's where we have to see trans people in decision-making positions. So that was a holistic practice in our film. And I think people feel it when they watch the film. I think it comes through. I think there's a sensitivity, there's an intimacy, there's a trust that just was organically formed on set because of that commitment over all those years.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like there's a real reckoning happening in the entertainment industry, but not only around trans folks behind the scenes, but also obviously BIPOC folks and others, that all of it's not just enough to put a person in front of the camera, the producers, where the money comes from, all of those things that are what really change the systems versus just the visual, right? So I really applaud you for that process, because it seems I imagine it was more time consuming than if you had just grabbed the first people available.
It was certainly time consuming, but making a film is really hard, right? It's like, where do you choose to put your energy? Like, where do you choose to put your attention to make a difference? We're always making those choices in making films. And a lot of people, yeah, they'll say that, why put your energy there when we can hire someone next door? You know, why cast you know, a national call for a crew? It's, you know, if you're saying you want to make a difference, that's where you put your energy. So yeah, it was hard. And also some of our backers were like, no, you just hired the best person for the role. And, you know, that was the most offensive thing you could possibly say, because a trans person is the best person for the role, right? And, you know, also when we're talking just about the specifics of the craft, like a trans person, you know, someone who has a stake in the story, a really personal, deep stake in the story, is going to know how to frame it, you know, better. And I don't mean like, I mean like our DP, you know, the trans woman, she has a sensitivity when she's looking at the monitor and she looks how a trans person is lit and how they're framed. There's that, you can't teach that, right? Only life experience brings that lens.
Yeah. Yeah, and Jen, I mean, you said this right at the top of the documentary, and then I think you are very eloquent about it throughout the documentary. Just that it's time for, you know, trans people to take the center of their own stories, and I think I wonder where you feel we are in that process, and how we will evolve further, because, you know, there's still not a lot out there, even though there's moments of groundbreaking like Disclosure. So
It's getting better, and it's getting better very quickly. And Disclosure itself is becoming a demarcation point where I had a meeting recently with casting executives at a major network, what's called a general, which is when an actor just comes in and kind of gets to know all the casting people, and they get to know you. And usually in those kinds of generals, which I have frequently, a lot of what I'm doing is educational. I'm coming in and letting these casting people know that, you know, both the importance of casting trans people in trans parts, but also just casting trans people in general. You know, barista number 2 doesn't need to be a cis person. Like, their gender is never going to come up. It can be a trans person, and that we are a part of the world. And for the most part, casting executives have always been very open to it. I've never encountered any kind of hostility. It's more just they never think about it. You know, there is this kind of path of least resistance is fairly common. And so they see a part and they just kind of like stereotype, and it's just expand that to include trans people is a big step. And in this particular meeting, I started to kind of go into something, and it was with, I think, 6 executives. I'm like, oh, we've all seen Disclosure. Like, they had all seen it, they know it, they totally get it, they're behind it. And it's like, I don't have to do any of that education anymore. Not only do I not need to do the education just to get them up to kind of like common ground with those of us who've been doing this work, they're now, they have like an enthusiastic investment themselves to do better. You know, there's a bit of culpability. One of the very clever things that the film does is when they take these depictions that you've seen many times before, often in isolation, and then you put them together into a movie like Disclosure, you start to see these tropes and patterns emerge, and you see the damage that they do, and suddenly you become very uncomfortable about things that you used to love, and it kind of makes you complicit in that. Like, I was part of this problem, and this film has resulted in people with real power in Hollywood wanting to do better, recognizing their own complicity and having a genuine enthusiastic desire to do better. And there's so many ways that Disclosure is doing that. And one of the ways that, and I don't think we've ever talked about this, Sam, but I had this really interesting meeting the other day with a social scientist who works on implicit bias. There was this neat summit where we were pairing TV writers with social scientists and activists and things like that to kind of like see where we could help create social change that was kind of data driven. And one of the things she talked about is implicit bias isn't changed by the message of something. It's changed by the wallpaper. The things that are just kind of in the background and you take for granted is what actually kind of rewires the brain. And while I think Disclosure makes a fantastic explicit argument and does it very, very well and will change a lot of minds, what's equally powerful is the fact that there are, how many subjects, Sam?
31.
31. I mean, most often, like 80% of people have only ever seen a trans person, you know, on television. And even in those cases, it's often played by cis people, or it's a single guest star role in a show or a movie. in Disclosure, you end up seeing 31 people from, early 20s up through 70s, across different races and gender identity and gender expression. So the wallpaper of the film is also going to shift people's brain just in terms of what they think a trans person is. And then not only just the sheer variety, but everyone in that film is articulate and has a unique personality and a sense of humor. And that's going to shift the way that people think of trans people in the industry. So the film really works on all these multiple levels.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, this question of representation, which obviously is sort of the question of the film in a historical trajectory, and I wonder, it is complicated. I was thinking about, I mean, there's a lot of puking in that one whole section when everybody discovers the reveal of that they've been with a trans person, didn't know it, and then they have to throw up, and it's gut wrenching. And then there's a part of it that's just sort of like so ridiculous that you're like, oh my God, like I actually watched all these films, and when you line it up all together, it's just you can't believe how that representation was the way to express the surprise, but in the documentary there's a lot of conversation about, even in these terrible portrayals, there was still a trans person visible, right? And I think about that in terms of my students, many identify as trans and non-binary, just the craving of seeing any kind of representation, and so I wondered if both of you might talk a little bit about what is the good and bad representations, and how do we think about that? Because it's I mean, it can be simple in some ways, but it's also, I think, more complicated when you want to tell complicated stories.
So can you say that? Go ahead, Jim.
I'm just wondering talking about like how you think about what a good representation is versus what a bad representation is, and like what kind of stories are we not? I mean, I know there's a bunch of stories we're not telling, and I just wonder how you I guess I just wonder how you think about representation and what we need to be seeing.
People ask me this question a lot, and I'm a very opinionated person. Yeah. And if you show me something, I will say, yes, this is horrible. This is great. Like, I'm dramatic and extreme, and I have no problem doing that. But I don't honestly see the utility of that in the big picture. And so that's why with Disclosure, there are 31 people with 31 different experiences, 31 different ways over a lifetime of looking at media and ingesting it and internalizing it, and then being able to talk about it. You specifically talking about like the vomiting scene. There were even more clips than are in the film, and specifically with the crying game, which for me personally had a big impact when I saw it when I was 15. But most of the people in Disclosure are talking about it in a very negative light. But then Zachary Drucker comes in and says, when I saw it, all I saw was this beautiful woman with this penis, and that opened up possibilities for her. Right. And so that is so important, I think, because we just don't know what people are going to take away from what they see. And so what's most important, rather than saying what's good or bad, is learning how to watch things with a critical lens, learning how to be media literate, and that's, I think, one of the big aims for me with Disclosure was to use this platform and this way of storytelling about a topic that I'm very passionate about, but also have it be like a case study of this is how you can be media literate about Hollywood, right? The images that most people are seeing on a daily basis. So, and then another side of that is, well, actually, I'll leave it there, and Jen, pick up there.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of these things are complicated, just like Zachary's response to Crying Game. My quotes in this film are used often to justify the argument that it's never okay for cis actors to play trans parts, but some of my favorite trans performances have been by cis people. Some movies I really love and I recognize they're problematic. I mean, it was just Halloween, and I rewatched Rocky Horror Picture Show for the first time in several years, and I love it. And I'm remembering, boy, when I was 14 and saw Dr. Frankenfurter, that was really electric for me. doesn't fit really in any kind of category that we know of. It's certainly not cleanly, but it did show this kind of exuberant, creative gender expression that was, kind of intentionally queer and violated all kinds of anticipations and boundaries. And that definitely opened up some possibilities for me. And that was very exciting. And we can kind of go on and on. Like you mentioned, there's a couple instances in Disclosure. Silence of the Lambs is another place, like in the film, where Sam actually has, like, both me talking about how it's had a negative impact, even though I love the film, and then Bianca Lee talking about how much she loves the film and doesn't see it as problematic. And so it does exactly what Sam does and create that media literacy. But at the very least that it does get you to think about it from the perspective of the people who are being portrayed. And I think ultimately anything that engenders more empathy is going to kind of fall on the good side, as much as that binary can exist at all.
Yeah, I think about that in terms of just not you aren't virtuous just because you're trans. Your story is not necessarily virtuous just because you're trans, and nor is your story nefarious just because you're trans. So but I think in that your point about media literacy, which is I think really just literacy kind of period, is how as a culture we begin to kind of navigate those questions more in a more nuanced way. And I appreciated the film's ability, I think, to do that, to say, yeah, this was awful, and Zachary saw something entirely different, right? And so that's nuance, and I think that it seemed like a crucial part of the film. I've got a few questions lining up on the side. I wanted to ask you, Jen, a question about the end of the film. I mean, it's really very emotional moment at the end of the film, that father talking about his trans child, and I can't imagine any trans person of an age not feeling like, oh my God, what would it have been? And the kind of emotion that you conveyed about like how given that I'll assume all of us didn't get that at age 5, however young that child is, we all didn't get that at age 5. How is it that we build that sense of ourselves, with starting what feels like from such a deficit of acknowledgement of who we are?
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad I said what I did in there, in part because the way that the clip ends after that moment of real pain and vulnerability is now I want that. I've seen it and I want it. And I think that desire is a really powerful starting point, because implicit in it is this recognition that I'm allowed it, or I deserve it, however you want to phrase it, and opening yourself up to that. Media plays a very powerful role in giving us that kind of permission. And I think that's why it's so important to have, amongst a kind of plethora of trans representation, some that are very hopeful and very positive, and show people who are supported and loved and lead lives that we might emulate. I think that's what allows it for us. I think for me personally, as an artist, I kind of struggled through art to kind of, Lily has this line in the film that I always think about, that her imagination created these footholds by which she pulled herself up. And I think for me, it was very much the same way. Like, I wrote a web series that was about, trans women falling in love. And it wasn't that I had that experience yet. It was me imagining what it would be like. And then that, for me, created a kind of space of possibility. And, I'm now engaged to be married. Like, it worked. So I think I think it's a powerful opportunity, and these kinds of narratives will help open up that space for more people.
Yeah, I think that's great. My wife and I have a joke, obviously when you transition, there's a lot of mirror time. And so now the joke is that I go, in the morning we kiss, and I get up, and then I just wink at myself in the mirror, like, but those kind of like moments of just like, yeah, I'm just going to affirm myself every day,
Yeah, that's nice.
I reflect, I feel myself reflected back. And I think, what I see so much in, again, in my students is just the craving for that. And so, just what an incredible gift you gave to the community by making this film. So
Can I just say on that moment too, just to go back to echo something Sam said earlier, I don't know that that moment would have been possible on any other set. When Sam talks about the kind of intimacy and comfort that a set full of trans people who are all coming together to do something that is going to help shape the community in a positive way, that's how it impacts, that's how it surfaces. I think, when you see Brian Michael Smith, like laughing about people ripping off their shirts to prove their gender. When you see Rain, tearfully talking about the impact of in Butterfly, I think all those moments were only possible because of the having been surrounded by so many trans people, having Sam there, having a trans DP and trans gaffer, all of it. Because I think so many of us, particularly those of us who are a little bit older and might have struggled a little bit to get where we are, we have a lot of walls built up. I mean, I've learned, like, I'm pretty good at, I've gone on sets where I'm the first and only trans person ever to be in that space. And I'm often there just to perform my transness in some way, shape, or form. And I can do that, but it takes a lot of armor to do that successfully. And on Disclosure, we could all just kind of drop that armor. And I think that's why those moments were possible.
Great. And Anna is chatting with me, saying to remind people that Lily went to Emerson. Just to say.
I forgot that. Yeah, I forgot that.
So we've got some questions here, and I'm not sure. You can tell me if you want me to read them or.
Just choose a question and then call on the person. And if they want to read their question out loud and on camera, they can just raise their hand digitally and I'll label their video.
Oh, great.
We'd love to see your faces and hear your voices. Make this a conversation.
Oliver has a couple of questions here. So if they're interested in asking.
So Oliver, do you want to ask your question?
Come on, do it, Oliver. We believe in you.
Okay, yes, I see a hand. I am promoting you to panelist. All right, so you should be able to turn on your video and audio now and ask your question. I love the interaction. It's a little awkward, but it's worth it.
Hi, nice to meet you. I'm Oliver.
Hi, Oliver.
I'm Oliver's roommate, Elliot.
Hi, Elliot.
I'm gonna have to check my questions again. They're not showing up for me, actually.
I could tell you advice for people going into the industry and talking to cis co-workers on set, especially in a role such as PA.
Do you want to expand on that, Oliver, or does that capture it?
Yeah, I guess for the second one, just you mentioned being the only trans person on set, and how do you talk to people on set when you are the only trans person about issues, especially when you're in a position, like not in a position of power, like in the lowest position?
A couple of things I'd say. First of all, we all do have power. We might not have, formal institution power, but anytime someone hires you or casts you in any role, you're there because you can do the job, and you should walk in having that faith. Early in my transition, I did the whole, fake it till you make it in terms of confidence. So quite often when I'm the most scared is when I will basically fake being confident, like I know what I'm doing. And people tend to mirror back whatever you're feeling. So if you walk onto a set, like, I know what I'm doing, I'm trans, but that's only one part of who I am, people are gonna just kind of like take that for granted. Like, okay, that's fine. And it's changed so much too. I mean, that time was probably, 7 years ago. So there's a very good chance you'll walk. I walked onto Mrs. Fletcher, an HBO series, and my prop master was a trans woman. And it does happen more and more frequently now. But ultimately, and this will tie into the other bit about advice to give people in the industry. Something I always tell people, trans people in particular, that I think is super important, I think super helpful, and that's be great at something. Just be excellent at something, whatever it is. That's nothing to do with your transness, because having that as a foundation is something you can always lean on. You always have that strength of, like, wherever you go, if you're good at that thing, you can bring that. People like that too. People are drawn to people who are confident and know what they're doing and have some kind of skill. As adults, the world moves very fast. We're just trying to get shit done, often in a very, very quick way. For the most part, people don't really care who you are or what baggage you kind of bring it. They just want to know, can you do the thing that you're here to do? And if you can do it and you can do it really well, it won't matter that you're trans, or it'll just be something that kind of like adds to your character.
That's great. Drew, is Drew there and want to ask their question?
Yeah, hold on one second. Change role to Sunday. Okay, so Drew, yes, we are going to welcome Drew. You are now a panelist and you should be able to turn on your video and audio and say hello to us. There we go.
There we go.
Hey, Drew.
Hi. So I guess this conversation can go wherever it wants, but I'm an artist in Boston here. I'm non-binary, and I struggle often finding work where I'm not the brunt of the joke. And it is important to me to be in a role where I am a non-binary person on stage. So how do you balance the work of projecting trans community, but also just being a person and not being like pigeonholed into, oh, you have to play the trans person. We have to talk about the struggles of being trans.
Sam?
I mean, I don't perform, so maybe that's a question for you, Jen.
Okay. You know, I mean, ultimately, that's a very personal thing. You know, there are some days when I feel up to educating and standing up to people, and there are some days when I don't, and I just don't have that energy, and I just want to do my job and get away. I personally, something I always say, like every part I play is a trans part, as far as I'm concerned. I've had plenty of parts where their gender is never mentioned, and then people assume like, oh, you're a trans woman playing a cis part, that's progress. I'm like, no, unless you see a literal baby coming out of my vagina, like I'm a trans woman in that part, whether the gender is mentioned or not, because that's important to me, like, because that's who I am. The same way that I can't not be white, even if the part, you know, isn't explicitly about being white, like that's who I am, and that's what I'm bringing to the part. So you find that balance for yourself. You root it in something that's strong in you. And then part of it too, again, is just relating to people at something more than just your transness or your difference. You know, it's finding other ways to connect us. I think often as trans people in particular, we at least I used to in my early transition, carry so much anxiety around that part of my identity that's kind of like all I wanted to talk about and all I would relate to. And eventually it just becomes just one part of you. You know, I'm a tea drinker and I'm trans. You know, it's like, it's just another thing. And it's like, sometimes you can connect over it and sometimes you can't. If you can't connect over the transness, maybe you know, I'm looking at my bookshelf right here, and I'm a Shakespeare dork, like huge Shakespeare dork. I take Shakespeare classes still and practice monologues. I love it. I love it. I love it. And my transness doesn't really matter in those spaces very much. You know, it just doesn't. Like we're there to talk about Shakespeare, and like gender will come into place, and when gender does become a thing, I actually think of myself as having this kind of extra endowment and, you know, of my knowledge of gender, and boy, that could have been taken very differently. I mean, just in terms of like my expertise and my skill base, like being trans, being non-binary can be additive. You know, it's like you're already this person that has these skills and talents, and then you also have this additional perspective. And I think if you walk into a space with like, I have something to add, like my experience is additive. It's not something to be ashamed of or embarrassed about, but it's a part of me that I'm proud of and adds to what I do, then I think those opportunities will manifest around you. But I'm feeling optimistic today, so.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that you share it so gracefully.
Thanks, Drew. Good luck.
Thank you for your question.
May, is May wanting to ask their question?
May, raise your hand. Ah, there we go. Okay. We're welcoming May. So you can turn on your video and audio now.
Hey there.
Hi, May.
So I got the idea for this question when you mentioned, Jen, that you're from Mississippi, and I don't know where everybody else is from. This might be a round table thing, but the reason that I came to Boston was because living in South Carolina, I thought, well, my circle of 3 trans friends is meaningful, but if I really want to get out there and make work and tell stories about that, I need to go somewhere where there's a higher, population density of queerness. And I came here and it's been rewarding and great, but I still feel like I'm struggling. I went from 3 people to 5 or 10, and I don't know if LA is where all the trans people are hiding, but I guess what I'm asking is, how did everybody connect? How did you reach out and find not just other trans people who existed, but people who you had such a close artistic comradeship with?
In disclosure,
Or
I
in
think
general,
just means in your
in your line of work, you've both made these really big trans communal projects. It just seems so hard to get that critical mass of people together.
well, when I started Disclosure, I'd already been making films for 15 years and been making films about trans issues. So I had been building this community of colleagues, some are friends, but not all. Some are just colleagues, people that we work together. And then Disclosure took 5 years. So, it's time. It's putting in your time. And I think it's also, it's the support that I think you like, Jen did it very publicly, I think, or like back in the Chicago days, of just showing support for each other's projects. And that's something I do behind the scenes, of just, anyone I see doing a project that I think is exciting, I'm just, how can I help? And then it comes back around. For me, that's how I build community. I'm a kind of a loner. I don't socialize very much. So community for me is through work. Jen, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, so while I was born in Mississippi, I mostly lived in Chicago as an adult. And when I came out as trans, I'm someone who, wherever I've been, I tend to create community. I think if you just kind of create spaces and you're generous, and like Sam says, you're there to help and support others, people end up flowing into the space. I think a lot of people would have said, there's no trans people in Chicago, but I just started hosting meetings and open houses, and I created a website that was all about sharing positive trans experiences. And then I created this thing called the Trans 100, where I was just celebrating living trans people and the work that we're doing, and the community just kind of like flowed from that. Maybe there's some kind of weird thing that just happens energetically when you put yourself out there in that kind of way, and you just seem to find each other. I think I was also lucky too in that my coming out and like finding community just happened to coincide with the time that like trans people were becoming increasingly visible, and we felt like there was an opportunity. And I mean, Angelica Ross was my roommate, and Janet Mock and Laverne Cox would come over for dinner. Like it was like before anyone was famous. So we just kind of got lucky in terms of that timing. But I think Sam said it best. Like if you're there for others, they'll be there for you. And then it's just time.
Thank you, May.
So good luck, May.
Thank you for your question, May.
Thank you. Lucia, to ask their question.
Lucia, hold on one second. Do you want to ask your, oh, yep, I see. Okay. So you should be able to enable your video and audio.
Hi, sorry, hang on, my slider thing was still on. Hi, so my question is, so Emerson College students study many forms of expression and communication. So what advice would you give to young filmmakers, playwrights, actors, journalists, and business majors on how they can ensure a more inclusive world through their work?
Great question.
I
Sam?
think it's a great question. And I'm just, there's a lot of ways to answer that. I think I'm just going to circle back to what I said earlier. It's like, where do you choose to put your energy? And if that is important to you, that's where you put your energy. And you check along the way, am I being inclusive here? How can I be more inclusive? Like, it's that what's the word? I can't think. I'm so distracted by the elections. Just full disclosure.
Yeah.
I'm just
I don't blame you. I don't blame you.
simultaneously freaking out over here about that, and I'm trying to be present here. Just having that attention to your intention. That was something I heard Ava DuVernay say in a talk she gave at a film festival. It's like, what is the intention? Where are you putting the attention to your intention? So if your intention is to be inclusive, that's where you put your attention, and you look at other projects, right? And you're like, and how are the ways they're being inclusive working for you? And when we're talking about sort of like intersectionality, if we're thinking about inclusion, often a question I get about disclosure is like, how did that work? Like bringing in race when you're talking about film history and transness. And in my mind, it actually would have taken more work to not talk about those things. Like it's just there, right? Actually, like inclusion is actually where things are, right? We're naturally inclusive, we're naturally intersectional. And so like opening your mind up to that, whereas our culture has been so reductive, right? And making us so monolithic in the ways we see ourselves in the world. And so actually you have to just like switch your lens and see that it's actually all there, and it's just where you put your attention to highlight it. That might sound a little abstract because I'm a visual thinker, and so I'm trying to put words to how I'm seeing it in my mind's eye. Jen is much better with words. Jen.
No, I thought that was beautiful, Sam. I thought you said it perfectly. Yeah, that kind of attention to intention, and then just kind of flows from there. I will say, just to add to it, is that it always makes for better stories too. Everything you mentioned, journalism, acting, filmmaking, to me, they're all forms of storytelling. And the more different kinds of people the more different kinds of perspectives you have, the richer the storytelling is. So there's also just a very practical benefit. Like if you want to be a good storyteller, you need to understand a pretty wide range of stories.
And on the same token, Zachary Drucker often talks about how, this is my second time quoting Zachary.
Yeah, I love it. Invoking her in there.
She talks about the more specific your story is, the more universal it becomes.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really precious thing for any storyteller to hold on to, because we always have to think about our audience, right? It's a huge disservice for not thinking about our audience, but it's so easy when we're thinking about our audience to then try to say, oh, we have to make this story speak to everyone, and then that dilutes the story. So I think just thinking about what is it that's so specific about what you're trying to say, and hold on to that the whole time.
Thank you, Lucia.
Thanks, Lucia.
I'm not sure if the anonymous attendee, there are a few questions from anonymous attendees, if they want to ask a live question, or anonymous is to say they don't want to do that. I'm not 100% certain. So
maybe it's the anonymous people.
Yeah, so yes, I don't want to include anonymous. So yeah.
The anonymous folks, you have we'll give you a few seconds to raise your hand if you want to ask your question. Okay, we do have one. All right. So Yeshin, if I'm saying that right, you should be able to turn on your video and audio.
Hello.
Turn on your audio. Yeah.
Hi, hello.
Hey.
Sorry, I'm just trying.
Oh, The Shirkers. I love that movie.
Yeah, I love it so much. Oh, thank you. Yeah, I don't remember my question in its entirety, but I will try to recite it. Just how do you guys as trans people kind of navigate the film industry when you're working in productions that are cis-dominated spaces?
That's a you question, Jen, because
I felt like I answered that earlier. What about your experiences?
I don't do it.
You don't do it.
No, I create my own sets.
Yeah.
So, I mean, honestly, when I was starting out in the industry, and when I say industry, like now I'm in the Hollywood industry somehow. That wasn't part of my plan. But my 17 years of filmmaking have been totally indie, mostly East Coast, scrappy indie filmmaker. So when I would work on other people's films that were not trans, I actually didn't last very long because I was very uncomfortable and I was very distracted, because having to negotiate, having your transness be front and center is really distracting, and having sets that were not conducive to understanding people's pronouns or having sensitivity around bathrooms or whatever it was. It really just distracts you and you can't do your work. And so I left those jobs. And after many years, then I just started doing my own. And hopefully that's not the way it is anymore. That was a long time ago, but that was my experience, honestly. Jen, do you want to give the highlights of what you said before?
I mean, yes. I mean, you walk in with your own sense of power and who you are and confidence in what you're capable of, and know that your experience brings something unique and additive to any situation. And remember that no one person is just one aspect of their identity. As much as I don't want to be reduced to my transness, I also don't want my transness erased. There's a middle ground. I'm at a point in my particular life where my being trans comes up very rarely. And when it does, it's because my experience has given me a particular insight into a character or a particular sense of authority when it comes to telling a trans story. But, as storytellers, very few of our stories are ever going to be about one thing. So I have 2 TV shows in development right now, and they both have trans leads, but there's a lot of other characters who aren't trans, and I need to be able to write about them too. So yeah, basically that. Just bring your whole self to everything that you do, and for the most part, people will respond to that. And then, of course, there's assholes out there. No matter who you are, no matter what your identity, there are assholes out there, and they're assholes. So they're pretty easy to write off for the most part. And when someone is an asshole that has power over you and you can't do anything about it, move on. Go find your people. I have no problem saying no to things and turning down things and walking away from things if it doesn't feel right. There's plenty of other people I can work with.
Thank you so much. I think I definitely need to work on that self sort of affirmation or confidence working in cis-dominated spaces, just trying to feel affirmed in my transness and whatnot. All right. Thank you so much.
Y'all, yeah, my pleasure. And y'all are young. I mean, I assume you're young. You're students. I mean, at least younger than Sam and I. So there's also an age component. The more you get into the industry and the further along you go. But here's the thing too on film sets. And I've seen this happen. If you are competent at your job, you're not terrible. If you put in the time, and if you're nice, you eventually make it. I've seen that over and over again. If you just do those things, so just keep showing up, be easy to work with, because we have long days on film sets, and not be terrible at your job, you'll find your way through.
That's great. I think we have time for one more question. Chloe, does Chloe want to ask their question?
Yes, I am going to promote them. You were promoted to panelist. Turn on your video and audio.
You guys are advancing already.
Oh, that's bright. Hi, hello. Oh man, okay. I thought I would still have my question out in front of me, but it was basically along the lines of, do we think the industry is headed in a way anytime soon where we're going to see broader representation of trans bodies that, stray from what we perceive as traditionally passing, or, bodies that are just commonly socially accepted and celebrated in the media we see, so that we can hopefully someday find ourselves in a place where everybody is able to see themselves truly reflected on the screen.
Go ahead, Sam.
No, please.
Yes, it'll get better. I don't think it'll ever be great. Not because of anything against trans bodies, but just general misogyny. We're an intensely visual culture, and film's an intensely visual medium. As long as a general audience brings all of these kind of biases to things and false aspirations, it's going to be an issue. I have a lot of fat friends, and particularly fat actresses who can only do one type of role. Once they're a fat actress, they're considered the funny one. It's only thing that they're allowed. As a cis woman, it's a big industry, a big issue. I will say that I've been particularly heartened by disability rights activists and their efforts at creating better disability inclusion in film. And I think that opens up a lot of areas around depictions of different kinds of bodies and different kinds of abilities that I think will open up more space than just the ones that they're talking about. Because I mean, let's be real. The fact is that most of the trans people who have made it in the industry are totally pass and are really good looking. But that's also true of cis people. Like that's generally true of our industry, at least if you're in front of the camera. So we've got a lot to work on there.
Yeah, Anna, do you have anything else you want to say before we wrap
Thank
up?
you, Chloe.
Thank you, Chloe.
I just want to say there
Thank
there was a comment from Oliver that just said that they think it's so cool to meet trans filmmakers as a trans filmmaker. So
were all the students in this class trans, or I'm not sure?
This is just an event that's open to the entire Emerson community. And I think it was, a lot of the folks who wanted to ask questions on camera that identify.
Gotcha. So we're a bright light for all these little trans moths out there.
You are both a bright light for all of the trans and non-binary students at Emerson. And so
good.
I can't thank you both enough for taking the time, and a real pleasure to meet you both. Congratulations on the film.
Thank you.
Thanks. So good to meet you. Nice to see you all.
Thank you so much. Good luck with wherever else this film goes. And thank you so much for joining us. And thank you all for the wonderful advice.
Thanks, everyone.
Have a good
Thanks,
night.
everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.